Hey, you're on ThursdAI. This is Alex Volkov from Weights and Biases. And what a crazy week this has been. And no, I'm not talking about March Madness. Unless we start taking March Madness and applying this to the AI field, in which case, yes, this March was definitely mad. We've covered so much. You'll hear that my usual TLDR after a brief introduction this time is almost 12 minutes. And you'll hear me speaking almost without breath to be able to cut it into this 12 minutes. Of course, if you're subscribed to the newsletter and the podcast, everything is in show notes. And I encourage you to listen to the whole episode and not worry if you skipped anything in the TLDR. So basically, recap everything we've talked about. And today we had two special guests. One of them is Matt Schumer from ThursdAI, one of the friends of the pod whose focus is on prompting specifically. And you'll hear his escapades with Claude and a lot of alpha coming from Matt there. And we also had breaking news from Open Interpreter 01. For longtime listeners, you may remember our chat with Killian from the summer about Open Interpreter, and recently our chat about the Rabbit R1 device. And you'll hear the open source angle on the Rabbit R1 and a bunch of very smart folks from Seattle and around the world working together in the open source to completely open source a hardware device that runs AI on your computer and in the cloud. And it's super cool. And it's a very brief conversation with Killian. We'll do more for sure. Also, Suno V3 was released in a breaking news from Suno AI. And you'll hear that I created a sea shanty that I hoped and tried to incorporate every little detail of what we talked about here in a sea shanty. And I'll play this probably in the middle of the episode. I want to highlight two last things before I get to the recording. One of them is I want to remind you that Weights and Biases Fully Connected annual conference is happening in April 18th in San Francisco. So that's fullyconnected.com. And a day before that, me and my team are running a workshop, a 3-hour workshop of improving your business with LLMs step by step. And I'm working hard on the content, and it would be amazing to see you there. And if you can't come, but you want to still support the podcast, please share it with a friend. Many folks tell us that this is exactly the type of content they would like in order to understand what's happening in the fast-moving world of AI. And sharing with friends is a incredible way to support this podcast. With that, I'll get to the recording. And as always, a brief intro, then a TLDR that was recorded at the end of the conversation to cover the breaking news, of course. I'll just edit it in the beginning for you. And then an hour and a half conversation full of insights and friends, cover everything important. And this week was definitely very exciting. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Welcome everyone to ThursdAI March Madness edition, March 21st, 2024. As today is a incredible agenda. This week has been packed in everything from Neuralink advancements to GTC announcements and Jensen adoration on stage. And I was hoping that because of GTC, there's going to be less announcements in the open source area and in other areas. However, there wasn't. This is a crazy week, yet another crazy week. And I just want to say hi to my co-host here. Hey, Nistan, welcome. How are you, brother?
Hey, everyone. How's it going?
How are you this week? Are you excited for ThursdAI today?
Was hoping to announce something for myself too on Whisper, but it's just not production ready. And
well,
these standards for product launches are really going up. You can't just wing something anymore.
No.
Considering how much criticism you'll get from people.
Yeah, I hear that. And I also want to say hi to LDJ. LDJ, welcome to the stage, brother. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. Thank you for having me up.
We spent a few hours together yesterday following exciting news that we're also going to talk about. And so that's going to be very exciting. Oh, I think we actually spent multiple hours today in multiple spaces because there's been a lot of stuff to talk about as well. And also want to say hi to a returning friend of the pod, Matt Schumer from Hyperride. Hey, Matt, how are you?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Always welcome. This is the cast for today. We're probably going to have some more folks. And I'm very excited to get started because we have just an insane amount of stuff to talk about. And really, I just want to highlight this one thing. I don't know if I'm be able to find this tweet or not because I just want to tell you this, guys. Grimes, the singer, the very AI involved singer, the one that duplicated herself, she has this thing where she says, last March was insane. Last year's March was insane, 2024. And she basically started counting off year 01 from last March. And this March is like year 02. So basically, our new AI era years, according to Grimes at least, start with the GPT-4 release in last March. And now we're like in year... we probably should do it like developers, right? Like last year was 0, and then this is year 1. And this past few weeks have been feeling like this exactly. And it just like the pace of innovation just moves forward so fast that this week, while I was preparing my what I call a TLDR is no longer a TLDR. I need a TLDR for my TLDR because there's so much stuff there. So I'll do what I always do. All right, here is the TLDR, all the topics we've covered on ThursdAI, March 21st. And we had one hell of a show following one hell of a week, including breaking news and surprise guests, and it's always fun to see. So here's everything we talked about. In the open source, we started with the fact that XAI, the company that Elon Musk started to be the secondary to OpenAI, XAI released open source Grok. Grok is their model that we've been able to access through the UI, and now it's open source. It's a huge 314 mixture of experts model with 2 active 8 billion parameter experts. It's licensed as Apache 2. It's not that great. It's a base model, but it's also so huge that many people don't even able to run it in any kind of consumer hardware. It's quite big. But it's great to have this size of model in open source. In terms of performance, it barely beats something like a Mixtral while being significantly bigger than it, which caused some conversation around the usefulness of something like this big. But they did release this, and they did release this in Apache 2 license and open source. Kudos to XAI team as well. In another news in open source, a company called Sakana AI that's founded by one of the Transformers original authors, Lion, and another legendary Google researcher, Hardmaru, they released a evolutionary algorithm to improve model merges. And Sakana is a Japanese name for fish, and they talk about kind of the algorithms as being like schools of fish that do different things when they're together. They called out friends of the pod, Omar and Maxime Lebon, for merging efforts and explaining what merging is. And they released a novel architecture or novel algorithms to merge models without continuous pre-training. Specifically, they released 2 state-of-the-art models in Japanese, a 7 billion parameter model and a VLM. And they're talking about releasing what I haven't seen before, a diffusion model that's also going to be merged with SDXL to generate other images. And they achieve state-of-the-art performance on math and Japanese LLMs. It's super cool, and I think the models are open source as well. We covered that our friends from LM Studio, shout out Yegil, released a new update that's very important to highlight. You can run multiple LLMs simultaneously on your Mac. And I think LM Studio is also support other platforms. And then they support the Command R from Cohere model that we've covered before. And now they've added support for JSON mode as well. So if you're running LM Studio, it exposes a local API for you. So you can actually replace your OpenAI calls with local actual OpenAI calls and have that in JSON mode, respond to you in JSON mode as well. So shout out to LM Studio. And then we had breaking news that Open Interpreter released their new O1 hardware open source Linux kind of device. They're a competitor alternative to the R1 from Rabbit. And we actually, as we started like covering this, Killian, the kind of the founder of Open Interpreter, who we had on the pod before, stepped in, and we had a great conversation about this. We didn't go like super deep, but definitely it's worth listening to Killian shout out many people who worked on O1 and how they position them to be the Linux of AI devices, and it's all open source, including, like Nistan said, STL files and CAD diagrams and wiring schemas. Like all of these things are going to get open source, so people will be able to actually build AI devices open source end to end on their machines, and it's quite super cool. So I'm going to add links to this in the show notes as well. Then after this a great conversation, we also had a conversation with Matt Schumer, who talked to us about Claude prompt engineering, specifically the different ways in which Claude Opus is now beating GPT-4, and even something like a smaller version that we've also talked about, Claude Haiku, with enough examples can beat something like GPT-4 at significant lower price, something like 25 cents per million tokens. And we talked about Matt's Claude Prompt Engineer notebook that you can actually provide like a simple statement and get an excellent prompt from Claude as well. We also mentioned Meta Prompt from the actual folks at the Tropic as well. And definitely great conversation. If you're into figuring out how to prompt these things, Matt is the expert that I know. He's like one of the top prompting people in the world, I think, and very worth listening to that little deep dive. After that, we talked about big companies and LLMs and APIs, and there was a lot to cover, specifically because Nvidia had their annual GTC conference where they announced new crop of chips and the new racks called GB200s with massive 720 petaflops of compute in one rack. To put the numbers in perspective, there was a viral kind of image going on with Jensen, the CEO, hand delivering the first DGX supercomputer to OpenAI back in 2016, and that had 0.17 petaflops, and now like a similar machine that's like now huge, a full rack, can get to 720 petaflops. So just like the staggering amount of improvement during the past few years is just like on stage for all to see. GTC was like a whole convention. They're like as big as Taylor Swift concerts. I think there's people sitting and listening to Jensen's keynote. They also casually mentioned the size of GPT-4 on stage, 1.8 trillion parameters that was trained in 90 days on something like 8,000 H100s. So Jensen confirmed a bunch of rumors that we had from before. And then they also announced a bunch of other stuff like NIMs, which is a new software distribution method, and also talked about Groot, their operating system to run robots and robotics specifically in the real world after simulating them in what they called an omniverse. Then we skipped forward in the big companies' APIs into Apple. There was a rumored leak that came from a very respectable source, as per Robert Scoble, our friend of the pod, that Apple is rumored to look into a deal with GEMINI, including GEMINI in the operating systems, as we're expecting Apple to step into the AI game and not something like OpenAI, which they also rumored to have chatted with, or something that in-house. It's unclear still for which purpose, but apparently, according to Robert Scoble, this comes from a very reliable kind of Apple coverage, and we should see like a Gemini involved. We had a discussion of what this means for Apple and why aren't they using in-house trained models. We also discussed that Apple, while these news are circulating, they also released a new multimodal one paper, which they geared toward researchers and provided a bunch of useful stuff, very detailed paper for multimodal, and the appendices there hint at use cases for embodied agents, which is super cool. And I was very happy to see that they shouted out Weights and Biases, including several specific like people on the team that were contributed to the paper. And by this, acknowledging for the first time publicly that Weights and Biases helps Apple to build their products as well, which is super cool, and we were very happy to talk about this as well. We then covered this incredible news in the AI companies labs world, where Inflection founders left Inflection after boasting numbers pretty recently and after getting very, very close to GPT-4 performance with a bunch of like 2,200,000 GPUs, H100 GPUs. Inflection founder Mustafa Suleimani left to Microsoft to head the Microsoft AI division, reporting directly into Satya Nadella, and then also kind of Karen Simonian, one of the co-founder, and some of the team left for Microsoft AI as well. And we just, at the end, we just covered that there was a scoop that Microsoft actually paid Inflection $650 million, mostly in the form of a licensing deal. So Microsoft will support Inflection's API efforts. Oh, so on the way, they also stopped being a consumer company and started being a focused like an enterprise company, providing API for LLMs, like we have from Mistral, Inflection, OpenAI, Cohere, and a bunch of open source as well. So they're stepping into a very big game, and we covered what this means for Inflection as well. Then we also briefly covered that Jensen confirmed GPT-4 size, but also interviewed all of the Transformers original authors on the original Attention is All You Need Transformer that transformed the world, excuse my pun, and they almost called Transformer CargoNet, which I'm not sure if it had the same effect, if they did call it CargoNet, and also we covered a little bit of insights from that panel. Also covered the GEMINI from Google, finally removed the waitlist for Gemini 1.5. So you can now go into aistudio.google.com and actually try the model yourself with 1 million context in parameters. You can upload video for up to an hour. You can play with this. And API access getting rolled out soon from Google as well. So we're expecting Google's TPUs to go brr. Nvidia and MIT released something called VLM that beats VL as well. Barely covered this, but we skipped over this, but it's great to see Nvidia releasing open source models as well. In this week's Buzz, the corner that I talk about weights and biases, I again mentioned that we're coming to San Francisco in April. So if you're in San Francisco, we'd love to see you. It's in the Marriott Marquis Hotel on April 18th. And a day before, I'm running a workshop together with my teammates about improving your LLM use case for a business step by step, including some exciting announcements as well that I'm going to hold off on. And you're more than welcome to join us. And if you want to fly to San Francisco during this week, I'm sure that there's going to be more events happening. San Francisco is like popping every day. There's an AI event, but the highlight of that week is going to be the Fully Connected conference for weights and biases. I'm going to be there, and I would love for you to come and say hi and give me a high five as well. In the voice and audio category, we covered that Suno V3 is launching today officially. Suno is the music generator company that some musicians and some folks who produce music don't really love, but somebody like me who never produced any music absolutely loves. So I opened the space, and I will end the space, or I will end this podcast with a sea shanty that I specifically generated, including all the topics that we've covered today in one song. And that was super cool to produce and play for people. And I saw a bunch of reactions laughing at this. And that's launching today. That's a little bit of a breaking news. In the AI art and diffusion and 3D division, we talked about Stability again. Stability released 2 new things. The first one is an actual open source of Stable Video 3D, the ability of theirs to generate 3D objects via video. So imagine providing a image and generating a video of a 3D object from this image, but in a video that like rotates from all different angles and novel views, and that's super cool. They also presented SD3 Turbo. So actually, before Stable Diffusion 3 actually releases to the public for us to play with, they already turbified it. So it's now like SDXL Turbo, SD3 Turbo. Stable Diffusion 3 Turbo is a fast model that matches the performance of this like next big model from Stable Diffusion, and does it in a few 4 unguided sampling steps as well, which is super, super cool that they turbified it before releasing the model as well. And I think the main discussion that we had was Neuralink. Neuralink yesterday announced they're going live, and they went live with an interview with the first human that has an implant from Neuralink implanted in his brain. And this first human, his name is Nolan. He's a paraplegic from the shoulders down, and he can't move. And he is now able to control his computer with his brain wirelessly via the Neuralink chip. And he says that he was released from the hospital a day after the procedure. It was super quick. He doesn't feel any adverse effects. And he's able to play chess and play Civilization 5 and do all these things that he couldn't previously do with very high fidelity. He seems very cheerful and happy, and recommends folks to sign up for the human trials of this. So we actually had a breakthrough convergence between technology and human moment yesterday. It was super, super cool to see. And I think we're going to start with the first one because we have Matt here, and I would love to just dig deep into prompting with Claude. So I want to welcome Matt Schumer to the stage. Matt, feel free to introduce yourself briefly and Hyperwrite as well. And let's talk about your Claude prompt engineer.
Yeah, again, thanks for having me. So, hey, I'm Matt, co-founder, CEO of ThursdAI. We're the creators of 2 sort of major product categories. The first is Hyperwrite, which is one of the leading AI writing assistants. If you haven't tried it, it's pretty amazing. I think it writes better than Claude in terms of natural, flowy writing style. It can pull from the internet, real-time information, and it's blazing fast. So that product's been around for a number of years, and it's still growing pretty tremendously. But our major focus right now is actually on the agent side of things. For the last couple of years, we've been building an AI that can actually operate your computer. So it can click around and type and pretty much use your computer as you would. Still in the early stages, but we're making pretty quick progress there as well. So that's what we do in a nutshell, what I spend most of my time on. But also I spend a lot of time on prompting and working with these models and learning how they work, how they tick, how to get the most out of them. So happy to talk about any of that, and specifically Claude Prompt Engineer.
Yeah, so I think, and let's try to time box this, also be mindful of your time, but I'm really excited about a few things that you released. So I think I've been playing with Claude prompting myself, and many folks who don't get why people are getting excited about Claude, my question to them is like always the same. Have you changed anything about your prompting style with Claude? Have you tried following their guidelines? Did you find anything like specific for Claude that works better and what kind of intuitions do folks need to rework to be able to prompt better with Claude?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to note is if you're going to prompt it like you prompt GPT-4, you'll get GPT-4 level results, right? It won't be significantly better, right? The thing is that's magical, right? They didn't train it to be prompted in that way, yet it can take these prompts that it really wasn't trained to work with and execute them at a high level, pretty much the same level as a GPT-4. But the real magic comes when you figure out how to prompt Claude in the way that they've trained it, right? Because prompting is just trying to figure out the closest approximation to what they've trained it on to do the task you want to do, if that makes any sense. Right, you want to figure out, back when original GPT-3 came out, if you wanted to have it write a article that could belong in the New York Times, you'd actually format it like a New York Times webpage, that sort of thing. So you want to figure out how they how they created the training data set through experimentation and prompt it in that way. So Claude is different in a couple of ways. If you want to get the most out of it, you want to do these two things. So the first is appeal to its emotions. Claude is much more emotional than GPT-4, and it's hard to explain what that means, but once you get it, you get it. Try to talk to it and try to convince it with more emotion-based language rather than just, here's what you need to do language. Explain why it should do it. Explain how it should think about things rather than just explain, here's what you should do. And that's going to give you much better results. And there's some other people that are way better at prompting Claude than I that have written about this a bit. The main thing, though, is using XML tags. And this seems like a simple, unimportant thing when you first look at it, but it's shocking how much they improve the results. If you basically wrap parts of your prompt in XML tags, so for example, if there's a role in your prompt, like you are a marketing expert, right? You might want to wrap that in XML tags that say role. If there's a task that's like very specific and hidden in your prompt somewhere, you want to wrap it in task tags. And I think this does two things, right? It separates out the prompt better for Claude to understand it more effectively, but also it's just closer to how they trained it, is my understanding. From experience, it seems to be the case. If you do those two things, I promise you, especially if you're using Opus, you'll get far better performance than you will out of GPT-4. You just have to convert your prompts. To make this a little bit easier, I actually built a prompt that you can use to convert your prompts to Claude format. So you just paste this prompt in, and inside that prompt, there's a spot for you to put your existing GPT-4 prompt in. Within a minute or two, you'll have a new prompt that's converted for Claude. You can edit it from there. Another thing I would like to mention about Claude, and I actually just tweeted about this, we've actually found some incredible results with Haiku. So Alex, I don't know if you've had any time to experiment with Haiku.
Yes, so I want to chime in here with Haiku like super quick. We covered Haiku briefly when it came out, I think exactly last week, and we've covered it when they announced it. And the price point versus performance versus the long context, not versus, like price point plus performance plus long context plus the speed, it just makes this model a no-brainer to even try. So everybody who still uses like GPT 3.5 for price points, they should definitely look at Haiku. But you added some more stuff there, which I really like. I had it pinned to the top of the space, but definitely tell us how you got there and what your feelings about Haiku are.
Yeah, Haiku is incredible because you're going to get close to GPT-4 level performance, but at a speed and a cost that is lower than GPT 3.5, right? GPT 3.5, if I'm not mistaken, is 50 cents per million input tokens.
Yep.
Haiku is 25 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so basically free for most use cases. The only thing I found that's lower is OctoML. I see actually Ben is in the audience, so if you have questions about Octo, ask him. But yeah, it's an amazing combination of speed, cost, and quality, and there's nothing like it. Now, the thing is, that opens up doors to doing some sort of interesting things. Most people, when they use these models and they're trying to solve a task for their application, build a prompt that works for something, let's say it's an agent task, they're going to go and use Opus, right, because it's the smartest. But Opus has a couple drawbacks. One, it's stupid expensive, right? It's more expensive than GPT-4.
Mm-hmm.
And it's slow as hell, right? You're going to take 10 seconds to do one step with an agent. That's not fast enough. That's pretty awful in terms of the user experience. But the reasoning's great. So how do you win there when Opus can't really do that for you? I basically took Opus and I generated for a specific task I was doing as an experiment 10 different outputs for 10 different inputs, right? So I basically gave it 10 different examples of this task and asked it to generate outputs. And most of them were pretty good. Some of them weren't perfect. The ones that weren't perfect, I went in and fixed manually. I took those and I actually put those as examples in a Haiku prompt for how to behave correctly. And suddenly Haiku was actually able to perform at a level better than GPT or Claude 3 Opus at a fraction of the cost, at a fraction of the speed. So this particular task, it would have cost about, I think, 75 cents, if I'm not mistaken, per prompt for Opus. And I was actually able to do it with Haiku with better results, faster speed for about a half a penny per output. The combination there is crazy. The key reason is Opus isn't going to get everything perfect. By giving it examples, figuring out where it gets things wrong, and then correcting them and giving them to Haiku, it actually gives Haiku the opportunity to be better than Opus, because Opus isn't perfect. Haiku won't be perfect either, but it definitely helps.
And
from there, you can even take anything that goes wrong and few shot them in as further examples to make it even more robust.
And with the 200K context window, it's a no-brainer. You can like keep adding in-context learning examples, and the speed. I think they mentioned something also for the speed of inference, up to 32K of context. I think they perform like extremely faster as well. If you like in the limit of how big your prompt is, adding those examples is a no-brainer. Cost, you stop counting cost as a concept there. I think it's very cool, and thank you for this alpha. And folks, you've heard this here first. Definitely follow Matt for more explorations on this. Matt, let's talk about the meta prompt a little bit. I pasted on the top, but what did you notice? You mentioned something that it like writes better prompts than yourself at points. And you've been in the prompting game for a while. You guys got access to GPT like before ChatGPT, way before ChatGPT. How come this thing can write better prompts than you?
It's all about landing on the optimal solution, right? If you think about prompting, it's what I talked about earlier. You're trying to figure out the closest thing to how the model was trained to get it to do the best for your task, right? And that's not always an exact science, not even close. I can sit there for hours and iterate, but I'm one person, I'm slow. Claude is a very good prompt engineer at a basic level, right? It might not match what I can do with a one-shot prompt, right? If I'm asking it to write a prompt for responding to emails in a specific tone, right? I could probably write a better prompt than what Claude will put out as a one-shot exam or as a one-output thing, and I could probably write that prompt in a matter of a few minutes. But that's not really how it works. I'm going to take that prompt and iterate it for hours and hours until something really is amazing, right? So it's reliable and it works exactly as I want it to work. That's great, but how do you take that further? How do you beat that sort of hours of optimization process that I would do? The idea is if Claude is able to put out words faster than I can put out words, which it clearly can, it can try many more things in the time that I can spend, or in the time that I would. So if I'm spending an hour writing a bunch of different versions of this prompt and testing them, Claude in that time could probably write 100x more prompts and test 100x more prompts. So basically it's Claude all the way down, giving outputs for each prompt, coming up with the prompts, coming up with the test cases, figuring out what is the optimal prompt for a given task. And pretty quickly you figure out which one is best. You can then take that prompt and redo this whole process to get something even better. But I found incredible results even just asking Claude to generate, let's say, 50 prompts and then coming up with the best output out of all of them. And it takes a bit of time, but I just go and do my other work. I come back and an amazing prompt is sitting there for me a half hour later.
That's definitely awesome. Let me just summarize like briefly. Folks from Anthropic, the Alex Albert, for example, from Anthropic, he's like the prompt engineer now moving into DevRel. They released something called Meta Prompt, which is a basic version of what you just described. Significantly basic. It doesn't generate, it doesn't do the loop, doesn't compare, doesn't go into the weeds, basically. And they definitely outlined the fact that prompt itself is a good prompt, Claude itself is a good prompt engineer for Claude. They definitely trained Claude to be a prompt engineer for itself. They use it themselves. And even the basic meta prompt, which I'll add in the show notes for folks, is definitely like simpler. It gives like incredible prompts. It uses the XML tags. It speaks in a tone that Claude understands. And it's really fun to just type a very basic like example and not even have to stress about all the explanations around how to do prompts as well. Your Claude prompt engineer takes us to the significant extreme where it actually generates multiple contenders and does like a DPO almost on them, preference optimization, where which prompts are better, and then uses those as examples. And so definitely folks should try this out. Matt, thank you for the breakdown here. And I do have to move because we have a bunch of stuff to cover. However, I wanted to highlight that your previous GPT-4 prompt engineer was great. This one is specific for Claude. So if folks tried Claude Opus, didn't get excited yet, or didn't see what we see, I strongly encourage them to try your prompt engineer or the meta prompt and generally understand that these models trained on different data with different like rules. Claude was trained with constitutional AI, for example. They need different intuition as well, and folks shouldn't get stuck in the one way they used to prompt and expect it to work. And if it doesn't work, they're like, oh, this is not for me. GPT-4 is still better. GPT-4 is great. It's been around for a year. From all I'm seeing, from you, Matt, from like other folks that I trust as my meta vibe folks, the Claude Opus is like really great. And now we're getting to a point where like even the tiny one, even Haiku can perform very well. Anything else you want to add before we move to the open source area, Matt, that I forgot?
No, nothing. Thanks for having me. I would say if anybody does want to merge the meta prompt with Claude Prompt Editor, should be a 20-minute job. I just have no time for it over the next couple of days, but I think that would improve performance significantly. So if anybody here is interested in building an open source and wants to just take a stab at that, that'd be awesome. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so the collab is up on Matt's GitHub and it's linked on the show notes as well and on the top here. And definitely check it out if you want to submit PRs, please submit a PR. I will shout out, because how could I not? The Cloud Prompt Engineer collab that you built also includes a significant saving of states into weights and biases, which I really appreciated. And folks, it's like super easy to get started. You just generate a key and then you can log all of your attempts into a very nice table that you can then follow up with, and you don't have to store it in CSVs. So Matt, thank you for that. It was like I stumbled upon this completely by chance. Oh, hey, this logs the weights and biases. That's great.
You actually can't thank me. I thank Morgan McGuire. I think he's internal at Weights and Biases. He actually took my original GPT version and added it in. I was like, why not include this for Claude? The whole thing was pretty much written by Claude, so it took all the amazing advancements that he made on the original version and included this. So,
okay, so shout out Morgan.
Yeah, it's awesome to be there, but you can't give me too much credit there.
So shout out Morgan, on whose team I actually am. I didn't know that he was like the original contributor to this. So it's great to see that it's there. And we're going to talk about more weights and biases stuff in going forward. So now we are moving to our favorite piece, which is open source. Open source AI, let's get it started. So moving on to open source, we have a bunch of stuff to cover, including some breaking news. I'm going to only start with the biggest open source things, and then Nistan, Matt, and feel free to chime in here as well. XAI finally, Elon Musk has been having a big week, right? From Starship launch into the sky, etc. Last week, exactly on Thursday. Then at the beginning of last week, he promised that XAI was going to open source Grok. They did this at the latest possible moment. I think they did this on Sunday or on Saturday, and released Grok with a K, the XAI trained big large language model. They released it fully open source, including Apache 2 license. It is a humongous, like everybody, they released it in the best Twitter fashion. They just said weights in bio, where if any of you expanded the kind of the spammy comments that you all get, the in bio thing, basically they just said weights in bio, acknowledging that they can't solve this issue for some reason. Anyway, they released a huge torrent file and then they uploaded it to Hugging Face, a 314 billion parameter mixture of experts model with 2 active experts at all times with like worth of like 80 billion parameters. It's licensed as Apache 2. And Nistan, I wanted to hear your kind of your thoughts about this release, because we have been talking about this a little bit. What's your initial reaction? Have you been able to run this? Is a good question as well.
No, I've not run it. I've looked at other people that are running it. It's a bit better than the criticism we first gave it. So if you have conversational tasks, whereas stuff like you want to be funny or you want to be useful to the user and carry the conversation back and forth, is pretty good at that. Again, the criticism stands at just how large it is, and that makes it not very practical for people to use. But there are plans to re-architecture it a bit and get it down to being able to run it on just 2 3090s or 4090s to get it to run in about 40 gigs of VRAM, and then that will involve either merging or chopping off some of the experts. But again, just because it's so large, a lot of that testing as to what to chop off, what to leave, that will take a while until that happens. But I think soon people will be able to use it and have most of its personality intact while not being as smart. Overall, I am really appreciative of what they did. It's very good to have some other out of distribution data source that you can legally use for anything you want, because any of Grok's data you can use for whatever you want. I will not be using it as a quote unquote daily driver because it's not that good for those tasks like solving problems, or it's not like it's that bad, but there are much better smaller models or other APIs to use for that.
So I want to just highlight that friend of the pod, Technium, who we all know and love from News Research, a fine-tuner extraordinaire, he was immediately tagged in multiple threads about Grok and said, hey, when fine-tune? And he basically replied, this is too big for us to fine-tune. This is like too big for us to fine-tune, so not anytime soon. So I just want to like temper expectations, because what happens in the open source community, a new model like this releases and everybody's, okay, they released a base model. It wasn't fine-tuned for conversation. So it doesn't feel like that's what we get in the interface for X, because they did release a base model, which is great for multiple things. Many fine-tuners prefer a base model and not an instruction fine-tune model, because then you can fine-tune differently. However, I think I saw that Perplexity is considering fine-tuning this, but other than that, I didn't see a huge rush to fine-tune this beast, and specifically because of the extreme performance that needed. And also, there was like a little friendly competition from Igor Babushkin, who's like the founder of Grok. He posted the comparison of Groks getting really popular and showed like the star history, the GitHub star history that shows a graph of like over time how many stars they got, that they jumped over the Mistral source and like getting like faster than Llama, getting to 25,000 stars. And then Arthur Mensch, the GOAT CEO of Mistral, which we all talk about and love, he's like, congrats, interesting how GitHub star seems to correlate to superfluous parameters, which is really funny because Grok performs just a little bit better than Mistral. That was open source by Mistral, or at least on benchmarks. Again, I haven't run this and I haven't found even a demo online. I don't think anybody wants to pay this compute for us. And it's really funny because Grok barely outbits Mistral, which is significantly smaller, right? Mistral is 48, Nistan, right? Like it's 8 times 7 MOE, so 7 gigabytes per MOE, so it's like around 48. Significantly smaller and performs better, or sorry, kind of the same. XAI released Grok, thank you. It's a base model. We're going to see more. And if we see fine tunes, I think the last piece to mention here is that it does seem like they released a very early version of Grok, and the next version are going to be better. Nistan, a brief comment and moving on because we have tons of stuff.
Yeah, another quick criticism is because this is released in 8-bit, it makes it a lot lossier to quantize it down to 4 bits because it's released already quantized. And so in order to have a good compression, we would actually need the 628 gig version to have it in float 16, and then you can do much more accurate cutting down to 5 bits and 4 bits without having as much loss. So there's another issue here with Grok. You actually need the 628 gig version, which they have not released, but we could probably push them for that.
Yeah, we probably can meme our way into this. All right, moving on in the open source area, a company called Sakana AI released a new paper and 2 models. And if you guys remember I want to say a month ago, almost 2 months ago, we talked about merging. And we've talked about merging multiple times since then, but specifically we had the deep dive on merging with Maxime Lebon, the author of Lazy Merge Kit, and Charles Goddard, the author of Merge Kit. And many of the models on the top leading board of Hugging Face, they are merges. And like we covered what merge is, but basically for those who don't remember all of it, is a way to combine different models and take weights and layers from different models and combine them into a new different model without continued training. So basically you don't even have to have a GPU, I think, for this. And so this causes many very interesting properties to emerge and many like different new models. And so I think still the top of the Hugging Face is all merges, I think, to this point. And some of them get crazy. Like Maxime Lebon showed a way to see merging ontology, where you see which merges lead to which merges and when, etc. And Yam was talking about this, a friend of the pod, Yam Peleg, that he also like even wrote a script to like just randomly merge and got like a good performance. And so now we're seeing this big company called Sakana AI with 2 kind of highlights for Sakana. One of them is, I think they raised like a bunch of money. The CEO is a author of the Transformers paper, one of the authors, Leon Jones. And another one is a very famous researcher, David Ha, and he goes by Hardmaru on Twitter, very famous for his takes. And they announced Sakana a while ago. I wasn't sure what they're doing, and now they finally announced something. And what it is a new attempt at merging, which uses evolutionary algorithms, which is not new in the world, but they use these algorithms to improve merges. They use like evolutionary algorithms to figure out like which layers to merge, and they show that they can release state-of-the-art models. Specifically, they released two Japanese focus models. One of them is a LLM, and one of them is a VLM, so a visual language model. And they also perform like significantly better on math because they using these evolutionary algorithms takes like some math properties from like one math problem, and they show that their 7 billion parameter model can beat a 70 billion parameter models using these like improved merging algorithms with evolutionary stuff. So very exciting. I added their announcement here on stage, and they announced this on the stage together with Jensen, the CEO of Nvidia, where there was a panel with all of the folks from the Transformers paper, besides one, Nikki. I think she had a thing that she couldn't attend. And it was very interesting to see all these folks together at one place. So they announced this and immediately released it. It's in the open source. I think the two models are on Hugging Face, and the code is open source, at least part of it. So shout out to Sakana AI. I wanted to cover this briefly before we move on.
I'll quickly add to that this is just a more organized way of doing what the community has been doing for a while and when doing merges. And it looks like it's a mixture of merge kit and some testing script in eval suite where they run the genetic algorithms. And I confirmed this method works really well, especially for translations. I was able myself to get like 18th place on an alt account on Hugging Face.
Nice.
with the Raccoon Small model. And yeah, however, I haven't pushed out that code, but at the same time, neither has Sakana yet on their GitHub. So we don't know exactly what they use, but my prediction would be most likely merge kit plus some eval suite and a controller or orchestrator.
Yeah, which would be dope if they open source as well. It's great that they announced this, and we're waiting for more stuff from them. They also released like a full paper going in deep into merging, and they cited both Omar Sansivero from Hugging Face and Maxime Lebon that we've covered. So pretty cool to see how.
Oh, and really quickly, Yam here, who's a friend of the pod, was able to get first place with his experimental 26.7b by redoing all of the merges. In his case, he did 218 of them. He did them by hand. He traced all the merges down. Yeah, this is a method that works really well, and it's underutilized now for many things, not just translations. So I'll land it there.
Yeah, and one thing they also didn't release, but they talked about this, what I haven't seen yet, is a merge of a diffusion models to make better diffusion models. So like image generation models. I haven't seen that area get to merges, and they explored it, and they said they're going to release a SDXL version that's also a merge without continued training, which is super cool. Moving on, just briefly, I want to mention that, again, friend of the pod, Yegil, who's like the author of LM Studio, which I think is one of the best ways to run local open source models, released a new update that's very exciting. I just wanted to highlight this super quick. Shout out to Egil for the continuous extreme work, and this software looks better and better. It's now possible to run multiple LLMs simultaneously if you have the bandwidth, if you have the compute for it. I know definitely I tried to load like two bigger models and my Mac almost crashed. But if you have the compute, you can probably run like two 7B models alongside, and then you can send requests to them simultaneously and just compare with them. So you can do this on LM6 Arena, but if you want to do this locally for models, now it's possible. They also support a JSON mode, which is super cool and like critical for structured output for many things. Sometimes you ask these models for a JSON, specifically Claude. Matt, I think, doesn't have a JSON mode yet, and sometimes it doesn't give you a full JSON that you can parse. But they released a support for JSON mode for LM Studio, and they supported Command R. If you guys remember, we talked about Cohere's new model called Command R, which is good for RAG specifically and tool use. So now LM Studio supports this as well. Very exciting news from LM Studio. If you haven't used it before, definitely give it a shot.
Yeah, I used this in beta as he was developing it. So I guess I was one of the testers, and it's really good. I was able to load in multiple small tiny models in less than 8 gigs of RAM. So if you're doing prompt engineering for open source models, or you're using those in production, this is a really good daily tool with a nice UI to use if you're gonna run multiple prompts. And the way it works is it does load them all in memory, but they don't all run at once because that would be slow. You have that option, however, but they will run just directly one after the other. and you will get the output from different models. So if you're resource constrained or you're doing edge compute, stuff you need to run really fast and have ownership of, use this in development. It's pretty, it works. It works on Linux and Mac.
And it exposes an OpenAI compatible API, so you can very easily replace your OpenAI kind of calls, or even take something like Matt's collapse, for example, just replace that locally and run this against something like runs on your machine via LM Studio, because it exposes an API. I think they have some API advancements as well, where you'll be able to prompt one LLM and then another LLM. Moving on to breaking news, I really have to use this button. I haven't used this in a while, so let's go. Breaking news. AI breaking news coming at you only on ThursdAI. Breaking news we have from friend of the pod, Killian, which is the author of the original Open Interpreter. We've talked with Killian, and a reminder, we have a pod with Killian from, I think, 6 months ago. This is a long time ago. It was a great conversation. Back then, Killian only launched Open Interpreter that quickly shot and became the way to run code and execute code on your machine and control your machine with that code, unlike something that you run in a code interpreter, OpenAI. Open Interpreter very quickly announced a new announcement after the Rabbit R1 device that we also covered previously. As I'm talking about Open Interpreter, I see Killian just jump in. Killian, welcome. We're just now getting to breaking news to cover Open Interpreter. Very briefly after the Rabbit R1 device was announced from Jesse, I don't remember his last name, it was very exciting and like a very closed hardware device. I think Killian famously had a tweet blow up and said, hey, we should build the open source version of this. And then tons of people jumped in on the Discord, I think, and in the community to start working on the open source version of something like this. And if you guys remember, the R1 specifically had one feature where you can actually, it has their services and their APIs, but one feature that they highlighted and they said is coming soon is that you're going to be able to teach their LAM model, large action model, whatever, to do stuff on your computer, and you'd be able to basically have a remote control for the stuff that happens on your computer. You'd also be able to teach. So you'd be able to walk around the world and like press this button and say, hey, what does do this thing or do that thing? They specifically showcased the mid-journey generation back then. And then I saw Killian's tweet, and definitely the Open Interpreter operating system, I think is what it's called, was very similar to that, like running code on your computer and doing execution. And this is the idea of O1 was born, and today they had an announcement that I pinned to the top of the space, a very exciting announcement, and I just want to highlight two things there. One of them is this is open source. I think, and Killian, please correct me if I'm wrong and feel free to come up. I think that even the CAD files for the hardware design are going to be open sourced. There's going to be a new language that you'll be able to write these things. It's a hardware device with a button that you can like basically push to talk and then execute things on your computer. So the examples that Killian showed were mind-blowing as well, and I'm sure that if you guys want to follow Killian, definitely do that, because there's going to be a full space to talk about all the capabilities. So I'm briefly covering this, but one of the examples that I loved, and Killian, welcome to the space, is the ability to open stuff on my computer, like my calendar, that I'm already logged into. So I don't have to give keys to any like third-party APIs, etc., and have it be all open source. I can actually use a different model or something like this. So now that I did this like a brief preview, Killian, welcome to the stage. Congrats on the announcement and the launch. How's it received so far?
It has been so fun. It's so good to talk to you, Alex.
Always great having you here.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, on the idea that this is something that you can run connected to all kinds of stuff that's not just OpenAI, that's feeling very open interpreter-y. It felt very much like a natural extension of what we had talked about last time, of what does it look like for this stuff to be model agnostic. Honestly, like the goal of this whole thing has been to try to figure out with this open source team in Seattle, how do you turn the same sort of things that like Light LLM and then by extension Open Interpreter did for all of the different language model providers. How do you do that for speech to text to speech, code interpretation in general? By the way, if I sound a little frazzled, I was up all night getting that launch out. And this is me post all-nighter. And I just hopped in. This is so awesome that you have pinned this to the Jumbotron.
So appreciate you
Um,
coming in after all-nighter. I don't want to hold you for too long. I think if you want to announce the space that you were doing, I think people will love to have a full conversation about this. I do want to ask about, there's a whole team. It's not like only Killian, right? There's like a whole team of folks who jumped into this and said, we want to do this. We want to build like the open source or whatever Jesse showed or whatever like we're dreaming about. Could you like shout out the team a little bit as well?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, so this started out from, as you said, that tweet going out about making an open source Rabbit R1. I was just in line at Whole Foods, and like an idiot, I was like, yeah, this would be cool to push this. And then I was like, fuck, okay, we got to actually build this now. And yeah, like within 2 days, like hundreds of people from all over, a lot of them, but like 70 of them in Seattle, hit me up. And we got together that following Saturday, like the top like 25 of them, I just picked through and what folks had put in. And there is a huge team that is behind this. It is by no means just me. There is Shiv and Man. There's a bunch of people you could see on the tagged teaser before this trailer went out. I'm going to do it again too. I'll quote tweet out and do some more shout outs. But holy shit, Ty Fiaro, Mike Bird, Ben Steiner up here, and Matthew and Finn and Michael Tiffany, who invented the kernel watcher idea. Like people who have been thinking about embedded Linux systems for a long time. And when presented with the idea of, okay, let's make an open source Rabbit R1, it became after that first meeting, like, let's do something more general. What does it look like to try to build something that's 90% of the way to a Rabbit R1, but also to a Humane pin and also to Avi's tab?
Mm-hmm.
There's something in common between all these systems, which is something like a language model that is, in my case, I really believe that it should be running code to do this, but a language model controlling a computer. So the idea of just something that is like a Linux distribution that you could fork and you could put into a piece of hardware that just has some inputs and outputs, and expect that when you fire this thing up, it's going to talk to you like the Star Trek computer. And you just have a pipeline of speech to text, that text going to a code interpreting language model so we can actually control the computer underneath it. All the work we've been doing at Open Interpreter on OS mode of it actually being able to like click buttons and control your keyboard, all coming into play here. And then getting beamed back out as text-to-speech is like just suddenly extremely feasible. Like even just saying that, it's like, yeah, this is pretty simple. And only in the last few months has it become like, this can happen and it can happen fast. And the idea that someone was going to be the Linux of this, that someone was going to do this, was like, okay, let's try to unify our efforts in that and make something of an operating system for AI devices.
I love it. I want to say that specifically I saw like a bunch of viral things saying, hey, let's open source this, let's open source that, let's build the open version of this or that. And they often never materialize because people actually realize how much work is going into this thing. So I do want to shout out the team and the persistence of you and the team to actually deliver and give us something that folks can use. So like a huge shout out for this. I'm excited to get it started. Can folks pre-order like starting today? Where are we in terms of the rollout?
Yeah, exactly. So what we said was, and I should shout out, honestly, too, just a few more names of Christian, especially, to working on a lot of the skill library stuff. And again, Shivan with the teach mode stuff, which is a huge component of this, is being able to teach it stuff. But yeah, so we decided we would just split up the first 100 among the open source team. But the hardware device, the O1 Lite itself, everything to build it, like I said in the video, is up there right now. And we hope that people make different bodies for this thing. It's interesting that the screenless component of it ended up being this really cool thing that like I really like about it, and a lot of people are resonating with it. But honestly, it was just like, well, what's the easiest thing you could possibly make? It would be a button with a microphone. And the next step, imagining what this could be like so other people can take this same stuff and extend it and themselves market it and make their own AI devices and their own bodies for it. That's the most exciting part, is figuring out how do you extend it to hardwares beyond the ESP32, which is what it's currently running on. So yeah, that's where we're at, is that yes, you can pre-order it, and we intend on making the Lite a really refined device, like something that is just much more polished and reliable. And that's a big reason why we wanted to do the developer preview, as it is, okay, let's start hammering this thing out. And that's probably on the couple-month timeline of getting some prefab chips. But the bigger thing here to me is the open source side of it. And yeah, that starts today.
And the folks can actually go build, give you guys feedback, and you guys start integrating this like feedback loop into the device itself. Shout out the whole team. Shout out Killian. Thank you for hopping on and having the chance to chat with us again. And folks should check out the first conversation, because I think a lot of the stuff that I saw, at least in the announcement, kind of harks back to what we've talked about previously when you just launched Open Interpreter. And a lot of this is the kind of the continuation. So it's great to see that it's moving into hardware. I'm excited to try this out myself, definitely. And folks who want to know more, definitely give Killian a follow for this. There's going to be more conversations about the progress of O1, and we'll definitely keep also chiming in about this. Nissan, go ahead.
Yeah, and good job on making it truly an open source project. I'm looking through the GitHub right now, and even the STL files, if people want to 3D print their own, are there, not just the software and API calls and stuff itself. It's really important for people to find ways to make a business out of it and get some sales while keeping the entire open source ethos intact. So good job on that.
Thank you so much, Nistan. Yeah, I really need to shout out to Rex St. John and to Richard Albritton, who have been just incredible hardware folks on this, and Richard responsible for designing the wiring diagrams and getting the first rounds of the 3D print going, designed and everything. I think that going beyond that too, like the stuff that we have, I haven't talked about this all too much, but this is where I'm happy to like talk to you guys about this and honestly find other people who are interested in building this kind of stuff. The point model that we had, which powered OS mode, it's more just like a pipeline of models like Clip and PyTesseract and some cool stuff put together. But that's also all completely open and can be run locally. So all the stuff that we presume with Rabbit, what they're going to have is like it beaming out to an API. But even the GUI control stuff is all right now already totally open. Like we put that out last week. And if folks want to play with it, that's in the Open Interpreter repo. But that's going to always be how this is run. This is super important. Just me coming from this too. I want to have control over this. And I don't think that this even becomes like what we all dream of it becoming unless it's all running locally. I know that devices right now aren't yet where they're at with compute for that to happen on a really small scale, but they will be. And yeah, I feel the same. And that's always how it's going to be.
100%. And we keep following like from week to week, and we see smaller devices getting smarter and like smaller models performing better as well. And we already see like a bunch of vision models start to appear and beating like better vision models. We're going to cover a few today as well. So it's great to see the progress. It's great to see the forward thinking as well. We're like, we will get there. And by the time we'll get there, we need something like open source alternative to a closed version. And I really applaud that kind of thought as well. Congrats on the pre-launch. Congrats, folks should go and check out the open source, but also definitely give pre-order a try and get one yourself and play with it. And follow Killian for more news. And Killian, more than welcome to always come back and give us updates as you guys go along. I'm very impressed with the fact that this actually happened. There's a bunch of folks coordinated and working for a release together. And as always, a banger video as well.
Thanks so much, Alex.
Absolutely. Always, you're welcome to stay along, but after all-nighter, I will understand if you just like silently drop off and doze off to sleep. Moving forward, folks, we have a bunch of stuff, but looking at the 1 hour mark that we've been here, and maybe stay for this one and then drop off, I wanted to say that welcome everybody who just joined the space. You're on ThursdAI for March 21, one of the like craziest week following another crazy week, following another crazy month. And another breaking news that we have today is Suno AI is releasing their V3 version. It's not breaking news specifically if you follow them, but if you don't, they are going to release their V3 version today. And in order to celebrate this, I just took the whole TLDR that I write for myself to what I'm going to talk about, and I shoved it into a song. And so this is a song, and I want to play this as a kind of to give me like a little opportunity for a break as well. And then we're going to be back after this and talk about big companies, LLMs, APIs, and also the first human who got inserted with a Neuralink chip. So it's coming after this.
Gather round me hearties and let's spin a tale of the latest news in AI, a world of innovation set sail. From open source LLMs to models grand and bold, listen well me crew as the shanty unfolds. For big companies, they make their Microsoft, all in the fray. Jenny whispers and on one side, AMD falls behind in the AI fight. But lo and behold, a wonder to behold, Neuralink Human, a story untold. Open source, the people's power. Grok and Sakanani models to scour. LM Studios modes, a sight to see. Accessible A for you and me.
It's hard to get them to say AI properly, but you know.
Breaking news, it never stops. AI advancements, they're over the top. Oh, and OS, kill the enterprise for AI hardware, it's on the rise. Hey, ho, me lads and lasses, the islands be blowing from open.
From open source to big tech, the river of AI news keeps on flowing. Folks, I just wanted to highlight that I finished this literally like 2 minutes before the space, and the breaking news from Killian and O1 was already integrated. So a huge shout out to Suno as well for this amazement. This wasn't one shot. Like I said, I did have to stitch this together a little bit, and I did have to try a few things, but this is literally like a sea shanty that was written by AI and performed by AI specifically for you guys. And it took me like less than 20 minutes. It's a crazy world we're living in. We're moving into the big companies and LLMs. And I will start with the fact that, okay, this week, I think it's still going, or almost end, Nvidia GTC, GPU Technology Conference. And I'm going to run through the announcement because there's a lot. Jensen was up on stage, Jensen, the CEO. Nvidia is now the third, I think, in the world company in terms of market share. It's crazy how big and fast they've grown. And it's very much correlates to the improvements of their chips as well. So Intel announced new crop of chips, Blackwell chips, that kind of are here to replace the H examples of Hopper architecture. Nista, I think it's not a new architecture, as you mentioned, in multiple spaces. But you want to chime real quick about what we saw from Intel?
Yeah, there was an AnandTech article, a very competent one that came out. So I don't know, I was mostly right, but not entirely. It is 2 chip dies put together, and it is mostly the same process node, the 4 nanometer, but a slightly improved 4 nanometer process node. And from the AnandTech article and what a lot of other hardware engineers were saying is that the actual improvement in terms of compute per power that you get is only between 15 and 75%. It's not a multiple as the reality distortion field of the presentation made it seem. And there was also a bit of a source of frustration for NVIDIA actually hiding for the first time the releases and the specs of the chips. Yeah, overall, much more power dense in terms of space. But as far as people that are running compute at scale are concerned, most of their cost comes from actual power usage. And the power usage per compute ended up being marginal.
Yeah.
In the variant, yeah.
So I would love if you add this link to this article so we'll be able to paste it for folks in the show notes. I just want to highlight that I added a tweet on top that there's an image of Jensen and Elon Musk and I think Sam Altman or Greg Brockman is definitely there, and Ilya was there, where Jensen delivered the first DGX computer, the supercomputer, the first DGX. He was able to carry it with him himself, and everybody signed it. This was like the first DGX ever. This happened in 2016, and that supercomputer had 0.17 petaflops of compute. Fast forward to today, they're talking about 720 petaflops in this like new GDX RAG. So they scaled this thing incredibly massively for the past like 6 years. And I think sometimes we need to stop and look back and see the progress from 0.17 to like almost 0.02 to 720. This was the jump in the time that it passed since he first delivered this first thing. And we also saw what OpenAI was able to do with some of these things as well. Obviously, they upgraded through the years. He also casually announced on stage the rumors that confirmed that GPT-4 is around the 1.8 trillion parameter models. That's a mixture of experts as well. And he also mentioned that it was trained on 90 days on something like 8,000 H100s. and shouted out that on the Blackwells, they can train with the same 90 days around 2,000 Blackwell chips as well, like a 4x decrease in terms of number of chips. But again, like Nissan said, it's all about power as well. And they talk about 1,000x compute in 8 years, but I think they're doing some tricks in that graph a little bit, so folks weren't like very happy. Vitali from Mosaic, I think, talked about the trick to maintain this growth curve was decreasing precision and introducing sparsity in the curve. So they talked about reduced precision, but I think for inference, the Int4, Nistan, what was that? FP4? FP4.
Yeah, and floating point forage is about 4-bit inference. Again, it's important for people to criticize this kind of stuff because it just goes into the whole reality distortion field and marketing, and it's not really truthful. We need the actual specs. How much is this going to cost over the year to a data center? Is this going to make GPUs cheaper or not? And here it seemed like it was going to be 20 times better, but the actual hardware analysis to total cost per compute that you get showed 15%, maybe up to 75.
Yeah.
So that was the reality checking in, and I think they should just stick to float 16 for all the graphs. We all know it.
I love
multiples of 2.
this sentence that Vitaly said, that this trick by decreasing precision and like introducing sparsity, where from FP8 to FP4, this trick can be played 2 more times until there's no more precision to decrease, to boost the curve a little bit. So that was a funny take. They also announced a new software distribution thing called NIMs, NVIDIA's kind of platform, which is like sitting on top of Kubernetes. And that's very interesting. A bunch of people started announcing integrations into NIMs, including Weights and Biases, by the way, but also LangChain, I think, is available via NIM, and a bunch of other platforms. NIMs is basically a portable container type thing that will work no matter which GPU, as long as it's NVIDIA or CUDA based. Do you be able to like send to your customers and provide software with, and we'll have access to the GPUs and run LLMs in there. Very interesting from the perspective of, are they taking on Kubernetes or Docker? What is the NIM alternative? I think the last thing that I'll shout out is how many times they mentioned the digital twin and the ability of them designing their chip factories before in kind of what they call an omniverse, and only then generating them. And this project called GR00t, which also trusts on top of Omniverse. GR00t is like for robotics, and they have a bunch of like operating system for robotics and simulating those robotics in Omniverse before kind of actually putting them in embedded robots. And so we've seen a big rise in from Figure to Tesla Optimus to now like different robotic structures. Jim Fan, a very famous dude on we all follow and love, gives updates about everything AI related. He's leading kind of the charge for robotics in NVIDIA, so that's great to see to be highlighted on stage. I think that's pretty much all coming out of GTC, besides the fact that Jensen also, in a separate, not in the keynote, he interviewed all of the authors from the Transformers paper. I already briefly covered this. I'll just cover like some highlights. So they interviewed a bunch of folks. Let me just shout out the goats of Transformers paper. I think Noam Shazir. Let me see if I have a quick, 1 second, please. Yeah, it doesn't look like I have a way to show all of them. Oh, I do have. Okay. So we have Ashish Waswani and then Nikki Parmar, who co-founded Adept and now moving on to Essential AI, sorry. Noam Shazir, who was like the author of many great things and many people know in the industry. He's not on Twitter, unfortunately, but he's like my favorite one of the panel. And I know, LDJ, you asked me for a recording. I think I'll post like a full recording of this after I be able to get off the stage, because I think that panel is like very insightful. So Noam Shazir right now is the CEO of Character AI, which if you haven't tried Character, definitely give it a shot. They're like, if you haven't heard about Character, it's weird because they're like, just on the amount of AI use cases, they're up there. They're like beating GPT-4, I think, at times, and how many people use them and how many people return. Jacob Uskwelt, he's the CEO of Inceptive. I think they're doing something biotech. Leon James, we mentioned with Sakana AI. Aidan Gomez, we talked about Aidan, I think Nistan's new best buddy from Toronto. He's the founder of Cohere, and they've been in the news recently with the Command R stuff as well. Lucas Kaiser, he's still an OpenAI member of the technical staff and been there for a while. And then Ilya Polsuhin, who is now CEO, but then co-founder of the Near protocol. If you look at just these people, all of them are building companies or founding companies that are worth billions of dollars. And they all just sat there, met for the first time in the real meet space, and Jensen had the chance to interview all of them. And it was great. The highlights there is they almost called Transformers CargoNet, which I don't know if it would have the same effect if they did. And also, they had the question about SSMs, which we talked about, state space models, and all of them had the chance to react a little bit to state space models as well. It doesn't look like a lot of them are believers in the current state of state space models, but some of them did definitely mentioned that we'll end up with something like a hybrid model between transformers and something else. They highlighted that the biggest problem we currently have is tokenization, and we need to get away from tokenization. I'm not sure if I understand or agree to that, but definitely that was the conversation. There's a bunch of other stuff as well about Jensen talked about how this is the new industrial revolution, and it was a great panel. I really recommend folks to go check it out, and it will be hopefully in the show notes, and if not in the show notes, probably on my feed, probably tomorrow. Comments on? No, I think let's move on. We don't have that much time. There's still so much to cover. I want to shout out Apple as well. There's two news about Apple from this week, one positive and one bewildering. So let's talk about the positive one. Apple released a new paper for their multimodal model called MM1. They actually trained and released a paper about training a multimodal VLM. It's called MM1 that supposedly beats like industry standards and is not fully state of the art, but definitely comes close there. It's a 30 billion parameter model. They didn't release. However, they do have a history of releasing models with ML ferret, so it's not like Apple doesn't release anything. And then they hint at use cases for embodied agents in the vision and the images they train with it. And that's pretty cool. The paper is oriented at researchers, and it provides a bunch of like ablation stuff and hyperparameters and architecture. And it doesn't seem like this was released to beat anything specifically, but definitely the amount of detail, the amount of like folks praising Apple for transparency of how to achieve something like this is very well appreciated. I don't know if folks want to comment. I see Yam just joined on stage. We'll give him a second to log in and get signal. I want to just highlight that for the first time, they shouted out specifically weights and biases in the paper. Not for the first time, but they shouted out weights and biases in the paper, and actually a few folks who worked with them to make this thing happen. And this means that I can now publicly tell you that weights and biases works with Apple, and there's exciting stuff that they use weights and biases for. Then the second thing that Apple was talked about in the news this week was that there's a leak or something, I think Information and somebody else said that Apple is rumored to look at the deal with Google about introducing Gemini's suite of AIs into the Apple ecosystem. And it also rumored that they already have chatted with OpenAI, and now they're like looking at Google. Obvious context here is that Google pays Apple something in the order of $8 billion, I think, for the search to be the default, so for Google to be the default search in Apple. And it's a very interesting outcome because we all hope that Apple's going to train something of their own and release. I think we even heard rumors about the naming of some such thing, right? And now there's like a discussion that it's actually going to end up being Gemini or something. It's still unclear for which purpose. So we don't know if it's going to be like, I see Robert Scoble in the audience. He talks about the new series coming. I don't know if that's rumored or confirmed, but we don't know for which purpose this kind of collaboration would be. So it could be like for some purposes, it could be for overall overarching AI on the phone as well. We know that Apple is behind. This news seemed like Apple is, after giving up on the autonomous drive thing, this news seemed like bewildering to many people if it's a good move or a bad move, or if we're going to get Gemini or better models, etc. Specifically because Apple is also releasing open source, and quite impressive open source. MLX has been firing on all cylinders on the Mac. They released like a full kind of PyTorch alternative. Very bewildering news. It's weird. That's all I have to say on this topic. What do you guys have to say about this Gemini news briefly? What do you guys...
There was a paparazzi image that somebody took of Tim Cook having dinner in a restaurant with Sundar Pichai, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if these rumors about Apple using Gemini is literally just journalists like jumping to conclusions by seeing this paparazzi image.
Interesting. I heard the other way around. I heard there's rumors, and then somebody pulled an older image of them sitting together. So it wasn't like that. That's why I heard there's an older image, not related to the latest news. But yeah, I saw this picture, and it's a very a very big meme as well. I think the context there as well that Apple recently closed their Project Titan, which is their autonomous vehicles project for a decade, with a huge amount of ML engineers that now are searching for other jobs within Apple and outside. And so they do have a large decision AI related in this thing. I'm going to add Robert briefly. And I will say, Robert, we still have a bunch of news. Hey, Robert, welcome to the stage. We still have a bunch of news. I would love to hear your comments about the Gemini stuff specifically.
Just real quick, that rumor came from Mark Gurman, who has sources right in Tim Cook's office. I believe the rumors. That's all I want to say.
Which specific rumor you mean? The new Siri rumor or the Gemini rumor?
The Gemini rumor came right from Bloomberg, from Mark Gurman.
Oh, wow.
And he has sources right in Tim Cook's office. When he reports something, I believe it. He's very accurate in what he reports.
He was very accurate with Vision Pro as well. So thanks, Robert, for confirming this, and thanks for helping up. Feel free to stay because we're going to talk about some more stuff. Moving on to like corporate. Oh, he dropped. Okay, follow Robert for more. He like has great sources as well. And moving on to some new corporate drama as well in the world of AI. Also bewildering, also crazy. For an announcement, Inflection just came out with an announcement. Inflection AI, we've talked about the product Pi and the co-founders, one of the co-founders, DeepMind, Mustafa Suleyman, and then Karen Simonian, I think, as well with him, and Reid Hoffman, who created LinkedIn famously, and then Masters of Scale as well is on there. They announced that Inflection is having a new direction. They're no longer going to pursue consumer, which is if Pi, you can use Pi, it was a consumer base, there was no API. They suddenly announced they're going to give us an API product instead of focusing on consumer. And Mustafa and Karen are leaving. And also they're taking some of the team with them to found something called Microsoft AI within Microsoft. If you guys remember scrolling back to the Red Weekend or whatever from OpenAI where Sam and Greg were ousted for a 3 days period. Back then, Satya Nadella from Microsoft basically stepped in and said, hey, the whole team can port over to Microsoft and recreate whatever we have from there. We already have the weights and everything. I think that this Microsoft AI organization is what they talked about. It looks like Satya tried to generate like a big Microsoft AI thing. And then now he has Mustafa Suleyman, one of the co-founders of DeepMind. This move is very surprising to many people, including investors. The Inflection just raised $1.8 billion just 8 months ago, and now all the co-founders left. They found like a new CEO, complete pivot to a direction of supporting API. They recently released that they've trained their Inflection model to be very like kissing distance from GPT-4, barely got there. They famously had 22,000 H100s announced that they bought. And now like this news is like randomly co-founders are leaving. Reid Hoffman stays only on the board. So very interesting that Microsoft is like, what games are Microsoft playing? Reaction super quick from the team here on stage about what do we think happened there or what's important. I know that open source community doesn't necessarily love Mustafa Suleyman very much. If you want to comment on this, Nissan.
Yeah, if there are any feds listening in on the chat, this is extremely concerning because it's a monopoly forming, essentially. You have now the CEO of Microsoft AI now has complete access to LinkedIn, so what jobs are being formed, complete access to GitHub because Microsoft owns GitHub, complete access to NPM, so any website that you're on, anything on the web, because GitHub bought NPM some time ago, and then all the AI stuff. So it is extremely concerning. I don't know how to put it any more lightly from our point of view. And Mustafa's career before DeepMind was literally as a government policy officer. And he's shown that he does not believe in open source and just wants to take control of it. So it makes it a perfect hire for a budding monopoly. That's it. That's all I have to say on that.
Yep. Absolutely. And
and last thing, I have moved all projects to GitLab and also looking to move all stacks away from NPM. Yeah, it's a monopoly for me. You can't have innovation while having that. So just on principle, that can't be. So most stuff I'll just post either on GitLab and Hugging Face. Not using Bing anymore either.
It does look like Hugging Face is like a good alternative. I'm really hoping that they're not going to get bought out by Microsoft as well. But I will say this. I will say that Mustafa, I really liked Inflection throughout all this time. I know that folks didn't necessarily like it, but I saw some tweet that I think underlined how people feel. Then somebody said that the NPS score, the Net Promoter Score, NPS score, whatever metric that companies use to measure their products is, somebody said the NPS score for Mustafa Suleyman is very low on my feed. So it looks like he's not like necessarily very well accepted on at least the Twitter sphere that we're at. However, he was able to jump from creating a DeepMind to then getting Inflection and getting like very close to GPT-4, and now leading Microsoft AI. Some amount of success there. I want to welcome ATAPI. ATAPI, you want to chime in on this saga briefly? I know that you have a lot of thoughts there, but briefly, I would appreciate your chiming in here as well.
Yeah, thank you, Alex.
And I think this is your first or second time here, so feel free to introduce yourself briefly, and then...
Indeed. So thank you. I'm ATAPI. I have a podcast called Emergent Behavior, which Alex was actually one of the mentors for. So I think one thing that you have to recognize that in a big enterprise software company like Microsoft is, what do senior people do, right? And senior people are basically sales. So when you hire someone like Mustafa Sulaiman, what he's going to be doing is going to be selling. And so you need like different kind of salespeople for different kinds of customers. And Mustafa is going to play really well with the government customers because he has that book out, etc. Right? And Microsoft has never flinched from servicing the government, the military, etc. I don't really see it as that serious. He's just a salesperson at the end of the day. And Microsoft has a lot of products. The way it works is that Microsoft is basically product agnostic. So they have dozens and dozens of product, open source, closed source, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They buy other companies and then they shovel it through the sales team and then they go out and sell. And it's a little bit like Pfizer or any other large pharma company which buys like innovation and then has a sales team that just goes out and sells. And that's it. That it's not so much as a technology company in the sense that they try to weave these threads of the tech tree together. It's a sales company, right? So I don't see it as that nefarious.
Awesome. Thanks for chiming in here, ATAPI. Feel free to stick with us because we have a few more things to cover. I will briefly cover, we're staying in the big companies area just for a little bit because Google, who we heard just a little bit from Gemini, Google opens up Gemini 1.5 with 1 million contacts. Yam, you want to reply to the Microsoft saga real quick before I move on to Gemini? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's important to say that this is a perfect example of the fact that it's not just compute. Inflection had all the compute in the world, and they had all the funding that they ever needed.
22,000 H100s and 1.
Incredible number.
So I will just say for context,
H100s.
For folks who are joining, GPT-4 was trained with 8,000 H100s for 90 days. They had 22,000 in Inflection.
I think that it's an important lesson because many people focus today on the compute because obviously the compute is the extreme nowadays, but people forget that it's not just compute is scaling, it's multiplied by the skill and the effort that you put. It multiplies your effort at the end. And if you want to get to the frontier, it requires a lot more. And I think it's a lesson to be learned here. Because Inflection was nearly there, not entirely, even though they had every resource they just needed to do. And I'm not sure what exactly they pivoted to now, but I don't see it as a good thing for the company in general that Mustafa left. So yeah, I just want to say that focus on other things, not only on the compute when talking about all the frontier models, because there is a lot more going on into making these models. And I think, in my opinion, that since everyone is buying compute left and right, it's getting ridiculous. You're talking to a compute provider and they're, I don't know, just fully booked till September or something. And you wonder for yourself, where all these people that book all this compute, where are the models? And why can't I get more models to use? Where are they? And probably what is going on is everyone is buying more and more compute, and it's very hard to get a state-of-the-art model because it's not just the compute. So it's going to be interesting now that the money is starting to dry out on players that got a lot of compute, and the models are not there yet. And I think it's interesting to see.
It is an interesting pivot point to see somebody like Inflection and somebody like Mustafa raising almost $2 billion. $2 billion. It's so much money. It's like a ridiculous amount of money. And there's nope, I'm out of here. I'm moving away from this company. So yeah, it's definitely like a bewildering kind of happenstance in the world of Inflection. We just covered that they boasted numbers for their consumer product. They have like more than 1 million users and they have retention numbers that are crazy. And then suddenly ta-da, we're moving away from the consumer business, moving into APIs and production, which I don't know who they're going to compete with. Can they outcompete Claude? I don't know. So last piece in the big companies, unless there's like breaking news that I haven't seen because I'm here sitting with you guys. Google, and it's also breaking news. I'm going to use this button. I'm going to use this opportunity. AI breaking news coming at you only on ThursdAI. Find you somebody who loves you like Alex loves the breaking news button is what I say. Google opens up GEMINI 1.5 with 1 million context windows, access to all. They're removing waitlists. So right now, if you never experienced a LLM with 1 million tokens in the context window, you can now literally go to aistudio.google.com. I think that's the direct URL. I'm going to put this in the show notes. And then if with just a Google account without paying, I think you'd be able to get to GEMINI 1.5 Pro. Not Ultra, so not the advanced version, not the GEMINI Ultra, the Pro one with 1 million context window. What this allows you to do is upload a video for up to 1 hour and have the model summarize this video. It allows you to upload audio as well to analyze audio. It's quite crazy. You can upload folders. I think this is the first UI that I know of. You can upload the folder itself, like the full folder with the Git, everything. I used it I'll give you one example of what I did. I exported a group chat, of WhatsApp group chat of I don't know, maybe 5 years, 6 years of conversation, and asked Gemini to analyze everybody who talked and what they talked about and highlight based on the top 10 talkers as well. So Google now has all the access to this data as well. But I think that it was around 600,000 tokens, 650,000 tokens. And just even for Claude, 200,000, that's a lot. And so you'd be able to do all this kind of stuff now, and they're going to roll out API access as well for folks very soon. So definitely go play with this. It's like a significant future feeling where you can like see what the future is going to be like when there's going to be millions, and because they theoretically say they can go up to 10 million tokens in the context window. You can also start to play around and try to understand the needle in the haystack stuff as well, and try to see how good they are at like retrieving specific things. So shove 600 tokens in there, 600,000 tokens in there, and ask for a specific thing and see if you can get it. So shout out to Google for releasing this and making their TPUs. So GPUs go burr, but TPUs apparently do a different sound. I actually asked Jonathan Ross on my timeline. Jonathan Ross, the founder of TPUs and then the founder of Grok with LPUs and a different chip. I asked him, what sound does the LPU makes? And he answered, the sound that you hear of a plane go supersonic and then break the supersonic speed. So that's the official word from the Grok and creator of the TPU. So those Google TPUs are going to go supersonic once they release this to everybody else, which is just the amount of compute to run this is staggering. Moving forward, I think I want to cover like this week's buzz a little bit, and I did mention this before, but I'll mention this again because I'm very excited about this. I am coming to San Francisco, and by me, I'm saying me and my whole team, and also like most of Weights and Biases team, we're going to have a conference of ours. It's called Fully Connected. It's coming to San Francisco on April 18. I'm going to add this to the show notes as well. If you're in San Francisco, we would love to have you. I'm working on getting the discounted tickets, but even if it's not, compared to other conferences, it's not that big. I will remind you that I mentioned that MM1 is from Apple has cited Weights and Biases. So Weights and Biases has clients in all of those labs, in all of those like big places. GPT-4 is publicly, they said they trained with Weights and Biases. So the client list is vast for Weights and Biases. And many of the foundational model folks will come and actually be on stage and talk about different, very interesting things. A day before this, my team and I will run a workshop for improving your business one step at a time by using different prompting techniques like we talked about here in the stage and different evaluation techniques as well. So you're more than welcome to also come to the workshop a day before and just high five. And if you're coming from ThursdAI, I'm going to be very happy if you just come and say, hey, I know you from the podcast or the stage. So I'm going to put these links in the show note as well. It's coming April 18th. I'm going to probably be reminding you guys every Thursday till then. Finally, it lands on exactly a Thursday. So I'm still figuring out how I'm going to do the show during that show as well. We'll see what happens. Maybe Nistin and Yam can take over for one time while I'm going to be on stage, but we'll see. Moving on from this week's buzz, I want to highlight in the voice category that another breaking news is like Suno V3 is launching. So the song that you heard before, the sea shanty that included everything we talked about today, that was generated just a few minutes before the actual show. And with the Suno V3 version, and it's about to launch today. I think maybe already launched, but I don't know. But you definitely will be able to play with this for free without paying. So I paid a little bit to get access to the early demo, but you'd be able to play with this Suno model for free. It's really fun. It's mind-blowing. Not only that you can generate music on your own and it sounds actually like something, they released like a revamped version of their homepage where they have trending music. And I noticed a few times this week that I didn't even notice. I just pressed play to hear one song and switched over and started working. And then suddenly, I don't know, an hour later, I found myself listening to the whole playlist of randomly AI-generated music, one after another, especially in a different language. That completely changes the game because you hear the mistakes less. If it's in German, it's like in German. Yeah, I don't speak German. To me, it sounds like every other like human-based German song ever created. So it's really funny. Folks on stage, have you ever played with Sumo? Or you know what? You heard the sea shanty now twice. Nistin, LDJ, any comments on the specific Suno created version of music?
What do you have to say, Nistin?
I'm biased on this as a music producer in a past life. I thought it sounded like a terrible radio from behind the Iron Curtain during communism, and you're listening to all this stuff that's like really corny and bad, but it's almost like good. That's what I thought of it, listening to it. I think it will be useful in terms of people ideating and trying to spin up stuff really quickly before doing more work in Ableton. Mm-hmm. And it might even be fun for kids. Who knows? Overall, it's good that it's out there.
Yeah, not open source at all, but definitely it's very fun to play with, and I recommend you guys play with this to test it out yourself. If you're not music producers or you don't have that streak, it's still very easy to generate something that you'll be having fun with, at least. So I'm having fun with this, and I hope you do as well. Moving on, and I think our last topic of today is going to be Neuralink, but moving on very quickly, I want to cover that Stability AI has been in the news lately. They're always like getting dunked on for several reasons, but they're releasing like crazy. And so they presented SD3 Turbo. So Stable Diffusion 3 is at people's hands right now, not publicly, so you still can't access Stable Diffusion 3 unless you're connected and like an artist that they test with, but very soon. And Stable Diffusion 3 is going to be the state-of-the-art open source following prompts and multiple different complex prompts as well and objects. But between the release of Stable Diffusion 3, they also released a turbo version of SD3, which is, if you guys remember SDXL that we've covered pretty much, SDXL Turbo released and then SDXL Lightning released and added image generation in less than 200 milliseconds, something crazy. So there's examples where you can just type. As you type, the image generates. It's quite crazy. Somebody from Replicate, Charlie from Replicate just posted a viral demo where he connected Whisper, streaming Whisper, so text to speech, speech to text ASR. He connected Whisper to his computer to listen to everything the computer says, and then generates images on the fly as they happen. And he had a viral tweet go off where from the Dwarkesh podcast, he just put on the podcast and then started generating images on every word basically they say. And it's crazy how fast this thing works. And so that's like a turbo version of stuff like this. And now the best model that's upcoming in the image generation world, SD3, is now already has a turbo version as well. So you'd be able to like, it's called LADD. I'm not sure what this exactly is. Stable Diffusion is 8 billion parameters. And Stable Diffusion Turbo is a fast version of that just like needs like 4 steps to generate these images. Quite crazy. And I'm very excited for when it eventually drops. I just having a lot of fun thinking about SDXL to SDXL Turbo took a long time. Now they basically use those learnings to give us the 3 Turbo way before it even releases. I had fun with this. Also Stability, they open sourced a new model called Stable Video 3D, where they use the stable video, which we talked about, but then generate a 3D object and a video of a 3D object in rotation. So they use the video version, think like Sora, but the open source version of Sora, to generate a video of something that looks like a 3D object. And I think there's a way to connect like nerves or something to it to actually extract a 3D object out of it as well. So I'm not entirely sure if like you can generate actual 3D objects to 3D print or to put in a 3D environment from this model yet. But I think people are actually doing this with something like nerves. It actually looks pretty cool. I'm going to add this in the show notes as well. And I think now we have 15 minutes left to the end of the show before the recap. I really want to talk about Neuralink. LDJ, you're still with us here? A sound check?
Yeah, I'm here.
You wanna?
Yep, I'm here.
We talked about Neuralink yesterday for multiple hours, and Robert, if you want to come back to the stage and talk about Neuralink as well. Yesterday we saw an announcement from Neuralink that hey, we're gonna go live in like 2 hours, and then they went live in the most, how should I say, a most non-production ready environment. It's just like a dude and his iPhone just hopping on space and doing lives. And what they produced was they introduced us to Nolan. LDJ, you want to take us and tell us who Nolan is and what was special about Nolan?
Yeah, so I guess he's the first Neuralink patient, and they ended up just showing him he's paralyzed, I want to say from like the shoulders down. And so he can't really move his arms or anything like at all, or if any, it's like very slightly. He's wheelchair bound and everything. And he enjoys doing things like playing online chess or playing things like Civilization 5 or 6, if anybody's familiar with that game. But what he usually would have to do is things like have his parent or family member hold like the iPad for him and stay up with him if he's like playing for a prolonged period of time. And even then it's like he has very limited function of how well he's able to touch the iPad screen and things like that. When I say touch the iPad screen, I guess he uses his mouth to control a little knob or he touches it with his nose and things like that. But then with the Neuralink implanted, he was able to actually even move very fluidly the cursor around his computer, and without any family relatives helping him or anything, he was able to play like Civilization 6, which is like this complex strategy game from like apparently to 2 a.m. he played the game. And he said he's only been stopping like binge playing those games because he has to charge the Neuralink after a certain amount of time. So it's really funny, and it seems like it's already having some really like big types of use cases and improvements to quality of life.
This guy Nolan, the most kind of unassuming, chill gamer in the world, and this guy from Neuralink just had a conversation. During this conversation, Nolan has a chip implanted into his brain, which is not new. There were like chip implants into the brain with 10 electrodes or something. So Neuralink is not necessarily new, and it's only improved for paraplegics as well. However, he had on the order of 1,000 nodes, I think, implanted into his brain with the Neuralink kind of robot implanter or robot surgeon. And this guy is playing chess by moving a cursor on his Mac by just thinking about this. And this guy is saying specifically that it took him not that much time to get used to this. And at first he was thinking about like how he moves his like right hand and left hand. And at the end, he just intuited it. And he says he's using the Force reference from Star Wars. And he says, I started thinking about how to use the Force to move the cursor, and now the cursor starts moving. And you can actually see, which is quite incredible. So if you guys remember, Neuralink previously showed us a monkey playing Pong. Was like the first telepathic monkey in the world, which was crazy as well. And since then, I think it took them less than a year or something, less than 2 years from the monkey playing Pong to a first human actually controlling his Mac. And you can actually see that the guy from Neuralink, he asked him to pause. They were so unprepared for this live stream that the dude has like blasting music on his Mac while the other dude went live. And so the Neuralink employee asked him to turn off the music. So you can see the video he just thinks about going and to the menu bar, clicking something and hitting pause. And it took him pretty much the same time that it would take you with the actual physical mouse to do this. And my jaw was on the floor when this happened. I want to also highlight that Nolan, the patient, he's famously for his Halloween costumes, and he's planning to go as Dr. Charles Xavier from the X-Men because he has a wheelchair as well. And my thoughts immediately went to, can he control his chair with thoughts as well? Or can he do multiple things at once, controlling the mouse, but also moving his chair forward and backwards? Because he seemed to be able to control the game while also answering questions. It was quite remarkable, folks. Quite remarkable to see like the first human telepath basically augmented with powers. And yeah, thoughts about this? I want to hear from Nistan if you want to chime in on this. Yam, definitely feel free. Etapai, I know you have some Neuralink conversations in your repertoire, so feel free to chime in here. This is the end of the pod, and this is like the most crazy thing that I've seen for the last quite a while.
I didn't see it, but I'm glad I tuned into ThursdAI and learned it from you guys.
100%. That's the point. We stay up to date so you don't have to, even if you're a co-host. Eripai, have you had a chance to review Neuralink? I know you talked about this before.
Yeah. Okay. So it's 3,096 electrodes.
3,000?
Yeah, 3,000. The array is 3,096 electrodes, but every thread that goes in that's implanted has something like 98 or something. They're implanting something like several hundred threads that go into the brain. And I did a rough 44 kilohertz, 16-bit per electrode. They're getting something like 400 megabytes per second of data, but that's the equivalent like sound data, right? Like it's basically noisy, and it has to be signal processed on the chip itself in the brain. And then after that, they're using Bluetooth, which I think has like a 1 to 2 megabit per second kind of like bandwidth. So that's all the data that they're getting out of the brain. And then, that I guess the receiver will have more processing. It's really like analog to digital signal processing on one side, and then machine learning on the other. I would say it's like analogous to what we do for sound, microphones, and audio, video inputs, etc. So they're probably able to use a bunch of the old signal processing tricks, a lot of the older machine learning tricks that we've seen used in imaging and sound. And it's probably super exciting, right? You have a new source of analog data, and you're able to like correlate it to a bunch of other stuff. And Elon just announced that they have Vision Blindsight, which is the next product, working on monkeys. I think he just announced that like a couple of hours ago. They're able to, for monkeys at least, replace the visual cortex with, I presume, a camera on the outside. I think it's super exciting. It's really like the merger that I think everyone from Sam Altman to Elon has been talking about for a while is finally happening. It's going to take probably like a decade or so, but it's the start.
Absolutely. And I think the highlight of this, of what you said for me, thanks Aitaba for the summary, is how much ML is involved in signal processing at the end, because the bandwidth is not that great, but the ability to control the mouse is actually, it looks like he's just like moving the mouse. The precision and kind of the FPS is very high. It looks significant. I also want to highlight with this kind of related note, not necessarily directly related, but definitely related, is I just pinned to the top of the space our friend at MedArc and our friend of the pod, Tanishq Abraham, who's like the CEO of MedArc. They released MindEye 2. And we briefly covered MindEye before, but now we're covering MindEye 2. They have a pipeline, they have a model that does fMRI to image generation with 1 hour of data. So basically think a person who's watching images or video, they're sitting in the fMRI machine, the signals are getting processed, and they take the signals, they run it through a transformer or diffusion transformer, and they generate images of what the person saw. And it looks just, whatever I'm telling you is basically like mind reading, right? Like basically sci-fi mind reading device. And they're doing this with fMRI, which is significantly higher bandwidth, I assume, than whatever Neuralink has. I just want to highlight these two things that happened in the same week. We saw the person controlling his computer with completely like a chip implanted in their brain virously. Plus, we saw a new paper that can translate whatever you think about into actual image diffusion models to actually show you what you thought about while watching this thing. And yeah, we're breaking through something in terms of like speed and improvement of the human kind of transformation and integration. I want to also say that Elon Musk's stated purpose for Neuralink was so we'd be able to catch up with computers, because we're limited on bandwidth, and we're limited to 90 words per minute on typing on the keyboard, and we're limited on 2 thumbs, excuse me, 2 thumbs on the iPhone, let's say. And this is the stated purpose of generally Neuralink. And the next one, like Aitapai said, they're going to go after blindness, to cure blindness, and they already do this in monkeys. And the way they do this, they actually trigger. So it's not read-only. They actually like stimulate the brain through those electrodes, how much scary this sounds, to actually trigger things on the visual cortex. I have a tweet about this. I'll add it in show notes from engineer, neuroscientist there in Neuralink that talks about stimulating a visual cortex. And they even talk about people who were blinded when they were born. They're going to be able to restore some of their sight. And at first it's going to be like 8-bit. You'd see light where light is, but for folks who are completely in the dark, that is incredible. So it's quite a week or a few months that we've had now in terms of like breakthroughs, and I'm just like very excited about how many things it improves as well. And folks, I think that this is all that we had to talk about. The only thing that I got in breaking news now is that HeyGen released their new version. I haven't been able to test behind this. Oh no, Morgan from the stage gave us a scoop that Microsoft paid Inflection AI $650 million, mostly in the form of licensing deal. the startup is then used to give its investors some returns. It does look like this whole Microsoft Inflection thing is a maybe acqui-hire without being able to acqui-hire without going to regulators. Adipa, you have a comment?
Okay, just to take a step back, 650 million is exactly the price of the 22,000 H100s.
Interesting.
So if you'd organize that deal, if Nvidia had put in that deal with kind of like some preference shares and it was a series B1 with a B2 and then they had a preference stack on top of the B1s, then it may just be a payment for the 22,000 H100s.
And this covers pretty much everything that we've covered today on ThursdAI for March 21st. And I will leave you with the song from ThursdAI, but definitely will add the sea shanty that we've covered as well. And with that, I wish you a happy Thursday. I'm sure there's going to be more AI news that will happen today, and we'll cover them next week. With that, thank you everybody for joining. Have a nice Thursday and have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.